You ever stop and wonder why you can be in a super noisy room but still zoom in on just one conversation? Or how a magician can make something vanish, literally right in front of your face? Well, it all boils down to two of the most incredible processes in our brain: perception and attention. So today, we're going to unravel how we actually see the world, and maybe more importantly, why we so often miss what's right there in plain sight. Okay, to kick things off, let's use a really helpful metaphor. Think of your attention as a spotlight, right? Imagine you're in a pitch black theater, and you've got this one beam of light. Whatever is in that beam is what you see. It's in short focus, crystal clear. But everything else, everything just outside the beam or in the total darkness, it's either fuzzy or you can't see it at all. Our minds work in a surprisingly similar way. So, who's a real-world master of exploiting this? A magician, of course. You see, magic isn't really about bending the laws of physics. It's all about understanding and, more importantly, manipulating the laws of attention. A great magician is an absolute expert at pointing your attentional spotlight exactly where they want it to go, and crucially, away from where the real secret is happening. And look, this isn't just a clever idea, it's a proven scientific phenomenon. Some researchers used eye-tracking tech to see exactly where people were looking during a magic trick, and the results were, well, pretty amazing. They found that when people completely missed the trick, something we call inattentional blindness, their eyes were just glued to the magician's face, following his social cues. But when they did catch the trick, their eyes were darting all over, especially towards the action on the table. It just goes to show you, magicians are masters of misdirection, using our own social instincts to control our attention and lock our spotlight in totally the wrong place. This whole idea brings us to a really fundamental question that's going to guide us for the rest of this explainer. If a magician can make an object that's right in front of you basically invisible, does that mean we only perceive the things we pay attention to? Is seeing really believing, or is attending what we have to do before we can even begin to see? All right, to really understand how our attention can be so easily tricked, we need to go deeper. We have to look at the brain's actual wiring. It's kind of like trying to understand how a computer works without knowing anything about its hardware. So, let's take a little journey down the brain's visual pathways to figure out how we really see the world. Okay, so imagine your eyes are like two little cameras, and each one captures a slightly different view of the world. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Information from the left side of your vision, that's the left visual field, what you see in red here, it gets sent to the right half of your brain. And information from the right side of your vision, the right visual field in green, that goes to the left side of your brain. This big crossover happens at a really important intersection for all your visual info, called the optic chiasm. So after that crossover point, the information travels to a part of the brain called the lateral geniculate nucleus, or LGN for short. You can think of the LGN as the brain's main post office for vision. It gets all the visual mail, sorts it, and then sends it on to the right department. And what's really incredible is how it's organized. It has 6 distinct layers, and it carefully keeps the input from each eye separate. So input from the contralateral eye, that's the eye on the opposite side, goes to layers 1, 4, and 6. And input from the ipsilateral eye, the one on the same side, goes to layers 2, 3, and 5. And inside this post office, the LGN is like a team of specialists. Its layers are split into 2 types to handle different kinds of information. The bottom 2 layers, 1 and 2, are the magnocellular layers. Think of them as the movement experts. They get their information from what are called M ganglion cells in the retina. Then you have the top 4 layers, 3 through 6. These are the parvocellular layers, and they are the masters of detail, handling things like color, texture, and depth, with their information coming from P ganglion cells. So here's the crucial point. This separation of information right at the start creates 2 parallel processing streams. The M ganglion cells feed the motion-detecting magnocellular layers, which eventually send their information up to the parietal lobe. At the exact same time, the P ganglion cells are feeding the detail-oriented parvocellular layers, which send their info onto the temporal lobe. So you have these 2 streams handling fundamentally different parts of vision at the same time. Let's go ahead and give these streams their proper names because you'll hear them a lot. The pathway that runs down to the temporal lobe is called the ventral stream. We also call it the what pathway. Its whole job is object perception and recognition, basically figuring out what it is we're looking at. The other pathway, the one running up to the parietal lobe, is the dorsal stream. This is the where pathway. It's specialized for spatial perception, figuring out where an object is and how we might interact with it. And how do we know this for sure? I mean, how do we know this isn't just a theory? Well, this is where clinical cases give us incredibly powerful evidence. Let's talk about patient DF. After a tragic case of carbon monoxide poisoning, she suffered very specific damage to her ventral what pathway. And the consequence was just astonishing. She developed something called visual agnosia. She couldn't recognize objects just by looking at them. If you showed her a pencil, she would have no idea what it was. But, and this is the amazing part, if you asked her to reach out and grab it, her hand would orient perfectly to its shape and location. Her where system was totally fine, but her what system was gone. It's about as definitive proof as you can get for this two-stream hypothesis. And this leads us to our first major take-home message of the day. Our brain is not just one big general-purpose visual computer. No, it has evolved these highly specialized and separate neural systems, literally distinct hardware, for figuring out what an object is and where it is in space. Okay, so we've seen how the brain's hardware is wired up for vision. But, having the right hardware is only half the battle. You also need the right software to make any sense of all that information. So now we're going to explore the brain's software, the automatic built-in rules it uses to construct our visual world. Honestly, the best way to see the software in action is to look at visual illusions. Take the Ponzo illusion. The top yellow line looks way longer than the bottom one, but they're identical. Your brain is automatically using those converging tracks as a depth cue. Or in the Enigma illusion, those circles look like they're shimmering and moving, even though the image is completely still. The really critical point here is that even when you know it's a trick, you can't make the illusion stop. Your automatic perceptual systems are just overriding what you consciously know. The big framework for understanding all these built-in rules is known as Gestalt theory. The central idea is pretty simple. Our brains don't see the world as just a jumble of disconnected dots and lines. Instead, we have this powerful, innate tendency to organize all those visual bits and pieces into meaningful groups or unified wholes. The whole, as they say, is truly different from the sum of its parts. Maybe the most fundamental Gestalt law of all is figure ground. When we look at any scene, our brain's very first job is to decide what's the object and what's the background. In Rubin's famous vase illusion, you can see either a white vase or you can see two black faces looking at each other. But here's the thing, you can't see both at the same time. In any given moment, one is the figure and the other is the ground. Your perception just flips back and forth between these two equally good interpretations. So how does our brain decide what's the star of the show and what's just the backdrop? Well, it's got a few little tricks up its sleeve. It automatically prefers things that are convex, curving outwards. It tends to favor the smaller area in a scene, and it's a real sucker for symmetry. And finally, if one shape encloses another one, the enclosed shape is almost always seen as the figure. These are the little cues that basically tell our brain, hey, pay attention to this thing. Let's look at another one of these rules, the law of closure. Our brains have this powerful habit of seeing complete objects even when parts of them are missing. The classic WWF logo is a perfect example of this. There are no actual lines drawing the top of the panda's head or its back, but you have zero troubles seeing a complete panda. Your brain is just using all its past experience to fill in those gaps and create a meaningful whole. Here are two more quick examples. The law of similarity just means our brain automatically groups similar items together. So when you look at this, you don't see a random grid of shapes, you immediately see columns of squares and columns of circles. Then there's the law of common fate. We perceive objects that are moving in the same direction as belonging together, as being part of a single group. And this brings us right to our second take-home message. A huge part of perception is not this conscious, deliberate process we think it is, it's automatic. It's guided by these powerful, built-in Gestalt rules. And as those illusions showed us so clearly, what our brain sees can be completely independent of what we consciously know to be true. Okay, so we've seen that perception has these automatic parts, but we started this whole journey talking about that attentional spotlight. So let's get back to it now. Because the single most important thing to understand about attention is that it's a limited resource. There's a bottleneck, and this limitation has some pretty profound consequences. Way back in the 1950s, a psychologist named Donald Broadbent came up with a simple but really powerful idea. He said our brain is like a radio that only has one tuner, right? There are hundreds of stations broadcasting at once, but we can only tune in and listen to one at a time. Everything else is just static. This is the idea of an attentional bottleneck, a selective filter that lets one stream of information through for us to process while blocking out all the rest. Now, a more modern view, like the one from Daniel Kahneman, sees attention less like a rigid filter and more like a flexible central pool of resources. The idea is that we have a total amount of attentional capacity, which can actually change based on how alert or tired we are. And we then allocate these resources to different tasks based on our goals. This helps explain how we can multitask, like driving while talking on the phone, as long as the combined demands of both tasks don't go over our total available capacity. So why does this all matter so much? Well, because when systems are designed without thinking about our attentional limits, the consequences can be catastrophic. At the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, the operators were just swamped by too much information. Hundreds of alarms were going off, making it impossible to find the real problem. In the Air France 447 crash, the pilots had not enough information. The system didn't clearly tell them that their own actions were causing a deadly stall. And then you have U.S. Airways 1549, the miracle on the Hudson. They faced not timely information, a sudden bird strike, an immediate crisis that they famously managed to handle. So, learning from these disasters, how can we design systems that don't overload our attention? Well, engineers have actually come up with a set of rules for creating what you might call attention-friendly alarms. A good alarm should be like a helpful assistant. It should only bother you when it's really important, it should be easy to understand, and it should tell you what to do. It needs to be relevant, unique, timely, prioritized, understandable, diagnostic, advisory, and focusing. It's all about giving us the right information at the right time and in the right way. And so we arrive at our third big take-home message. Attention is a spotlight, and it has a limited capacity. It is a fundamental bottleneck in how we process information. And understanding this basic human limitation is absolutely crucial when we design complex systems, whether that's an airplane cockpit or just the user interface on your phone. Okay, so far we've talked about attention being grabbed by things, or being a limited resource. But what about when we decide to take control? Let's shift our focus now to how we consciously and deliberately direct our attention and the brain networks that are responsible for this top-down executive function. We can really make a key distinction between two types of attention. First, there's bottom-up attention. This is stimulus-driven. A loud noise, a bright flash of light, something out there in the world grabs our attention. It's automatic. But then there's top-down attention. This is goal-directed. It's when we decide to direct our attention towards something specific, like when you're searching for a friend's face in a huge crowd. This requires conscious control, and it allows us to have sustained and selective focus. The classic demonstration of this is the Stroop task. The instruction is simple. Say the color of the ink, not the word itself. Now, when the word and the color match, it's super easy. But when they don't, like the word blue printed in red ink, it's surprisingly hard. Why? It's because reading is a highly practiced, totally automatic process for us. So to succeed at the task, you have to use your controlled top-down attention to suppress that automatic impulse to read and focus only on the color of the ink. So what's actually going on in the brain during this internal struggle? Well, we have a conflict resolution team. First, a region called the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, acts like a smoke detector. Its job is to constantly monitor for conflict between competing responses, in this case, reading the word versus naming the color. When the ACC detects a conflict, it sends a signal to another region, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC. The DLPFC is the manager. It gets the signal and then exerts cognitive control to resolve the conflict, biasing your brain's response towards the correct, goal-directed action. In other words, your prefrontal cortex is kind of like the conductor of an orchestra. It keeps the whole orchestra focused on playing the same piece of music. That's your goal, even when there are distractions. As the pioneers Miller and Cohen put it, cognitive control is all about the prefrontal cortex actively maintaining your goals and sending out signals that turn up the volume on relevant information, like the ink color, while turning down the volume on distracting information, like the word itself. This brings us to our fourth and final take-home message. We are not just passive creatures having our attention pulled around. We have this remarkable ability to consciously control our attention, to override our automatic habits, and actually pursue our goals. And this critical human ability for top-down control relies on a specific neural network, with the anterior cingulate cortex acting as the conflict monitor and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex acting as the executive manager. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground, from the basic wiring of our visual system all the way to the real-world consequences of attentional failure. So let's bring it all home and summarize the 4 key lessons we've built up together today.
First, we learned the brain has separate hardware for different jobs, a what system for identifying objects and a where system for locating them. Second, we saw that a lot of perception is run by automatic software, these innate Gestalt rules that assemble our visual world without us even thinking about it. Third, we established that our attention is a limited spotlight, a resource bottleneck that has huge implications for how we design the world around us. And finally, we saw that we can exert executive control, using our prefrontal cortex to consciously direct that spotlight and override our automatic impulses.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending thought. We've seen that our perception of the world is not a perfect one-to-one copy. It is actively constructed by our brain. It's shaped by separate processing streams, it's filtered through a very narrow attentional bottleneck, and it's assembled according to these innate automatic rules. So the question to leave you with is this. If our brain is constantly interpreting, grouping, and filtering everything, how much of what we experience as reality is truly objective, and how much is just a clever but ultimately subjective illusion?